good? All right, we'll get going here. So I passed out to everybody a copy of the slides you'll have today. For the benefit of the public, we'll post all this on the committee's website, so we'll have access to that. In addition to the slides, you've got an updated cost breakdown from Brian Richter with CNI attached, and then you've also got attached the memo from Neil Schaefer regarding their assessment of the connection at Crockett Road. So you've got that. Again, I've got about 20 or so slides to run through. Most are related to either updating what we know or on the facility, and from the time you got the committee's report, as far as some cost updates, the traffic study review, those kind of things. Talk about whatever decision-making process you all want going forward. We'll talk about the capital budget status in terms of this potential project relative to other significant projects in the CIP. And then kind of what are the funding opportunities for this project and the other projects that need some additional funding, kind of just the status of our overall kind of CIP funding over the next 2 to 3 years, because remember, none of these projects are a single year project. They carry over into multiple, they have phases and multiple fiscal years, and we've got different pots of money, and so it's kind of a puzzle piecing together. But that's kind of what my plan was today. You can obviously go in whatever direction you all want to go as we go through all this. So kind of go through what, since the committee completed their work and provided you the report, what kind of we've done here. We talked all along about if we're going to do this, that it makes sense to do the park office as part of this project, which would be office space and some area for fleet parking. So Brian with CNI has gone and kind of get a drawing to show what that looks like and some cost estimates, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. We had Neil Schaefer look at the both the parking number and the connection to Crockett Road. And they came back with, on the parking thing, really, there's not a lot of good data out there. They searched all around the country, did some analysis, and again, that's detailed in your memo, but came back to recommending what they think is still a conservative number of 212 parking spaces. I think before it was 340 something or whatever. So that's been cut down and reflected on the revised drawings. And then as far as if we have a connection out to Crockett, the recommendation and traffic assessment is that it should have an eastbound left turn lane on Crockett. So that would require some widening improvements for a section of Crockett Road there for an access point. So we've got updated cost estimates based on those changes, which we'll show you in a minute. And then I want to talk a little bit just about if we did this, how we, the city, would operate it in terms of accounting relative to as an enterprise fund, and kind of what that does to the financials of things. So this is the revised drawing. There's really nothing revised relative to the court layout or anything else. What's been added, this beige area here, is the park office area. And then this area down here behind the facility is a gated fleet parking area. So that's been added.
So those 212 spots that he's talking, that's just.
Does not include the fleet parking.
Does not include.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. That's public parking. So then the grayed out areas here are the spaces that would not be built. He's still showing them on there because they would be available to ever be built if you needed to. But essentially, these grayed out areas are the spaces that would not be built if moving forward. And the reason we did it there when we talked about it is if we assume we're going to have an access point here, then it would be preferable that this route back to here, because this will be used for other park users, to not be driving through the parking aisles of this facility. So you'll see here, he's showing that road with no parking other than a couple spots here or there. So you still end up with kind of a physical building of there, but it's more of a through road. Now, unless we do something at the indoor soccer center, you still get to a point where you're driving through a parking lot, but we didn't really want to recreate that problem if we didn't have to. So that's the layout. There is the access road would kind of run along here and then connect into there. So I think it's just a little better functionality if we're going to go that route. So that's the change in the kind of the layout. The court, like, nothing changed in terms of the configuration of anything in the building here. Any questions on that? And Brian is here somewhere.
Cost-wise, what did that, eliminating those 200 or whatever, however many spots, getting down to 212, ballpark, what was that a cost saving from?
It wasn't as much as you would think because we still end up
Have to kind
building
of
that
pay
road there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
A tremendous amount.
Brian, it looks like the footprint at the back had to move a little bit because of the fleet parking. Did that change your retaining wall process or anything
The
like that?
building itself did not move, but the fleet parking access and the parking on the back of the building was added with the footprint staying where it was.
Okay, but that doesn't interfere with your thoughts on the retaining wall that you would
It
have
does
to
not.
build? Okay.
Now there's walkways and,
It just works the way it works
Right.
fine? No,
Right.
it created no more problems?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
So then, and then as far as Crockett Road, again, you've got a picture of this in Greg's memo, but this is kind of what they're showing there. It's fairly short left turn lane, but enough for 2 or 3 cars. Enough traffic on Crockett Road where if you didn't do this and you had a couple cars waiting to turn left, then that can get really backed up at times. So that's the idea of why you need that. They're showing this pedestrian connection here as a possibility. I don't know that we're necessarily saying that we would recommend that at that point in time in terms of safety. It would also require you to then build a sidewalk all the way the rest of the way back to the parking area. But they're showing that since we have the trail connection here, you've got that potential functionality.
Because there's a pedestrian walkway a little bit further down at the elementary schools, but the sidewalk on the south side of Crockett Road doesn't connect all the way down, or does it connect?
It does.
Just
This
didn't go out
connects
there?
all the way back to
Okay,
Aberdeen.
so if you're gonna cross the road, you just walk down to the kind of Woodland Crockett.
Yeah, and then you
light
make
right
your way
there, and then
through
come back and come
today,
back up.
yeah.
Okay.
But this is, you could have this if we decided to move
At
forward.
one point, didn't we talk about not having a left turn there, that you had to exit right? You could enter, but you couldn't exit
I
left?
mean, that was an option, a right in, right out.
Yeah,
But it's just less capacity capability. It forces more traffic back to Volunteer Parkway.
so Neil Schaefer's really good with this one.
Yeah, they just felt that their estimate, and again, it's a little more detailed in the memo, that the
Yeah.
volumes they were estimating justified a left turn there.
Okay.
The other option, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Thank you. The other conversation too was that a left turn might be difficult because of the rise or the bend of
Site,
the road.
something.
sight
No,
line.
it wasn't that left turn, it was the
Coming out.
coming out
Yeah.
left.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And they said
Yes,
that
coming
by
out.
their measurement, it just meets the minimum sight distance standards on the
Does.
rise
Okay, they did
to
check
have
that.
the left out,
Okay,
to allow the left out.
okay.
This isn't proposed to be signaled or
No.
anything.
No. The other alternative we talked about, we just knew that if this was our answer, I think we would get a lot of beef, would to say, well, do the right in, right out, and if you're coming from here and you can't take a left, well, you just go down to Witherspoon, go around the roundabout and come
Right.
back and go right.
Right.
Practically speaking, that functionally would work. I think you get a lot of complaints, and you get a lot of people doing whatever they had to do to make a left into the right out type of thing. Anyway, so that's that
I mean,
recommendation.
the advantage to that, I mean, there's a lot of, sounds like traffic complaints already with the school and the park entrance all
Certain
being
times.
there together.
Yeah.
Yeah, this might alleviate.
And, you know, we talked about, and I don't want to get into the kind of the weeds here, is how much of this coming from the west, how much of that would just go ahead and turn into Volunteer Parkway anyway, just because it's the first turn? And according to Greg, you know, the study shows is that people will turn the shortest route where they can see where they're going, which would be coming to here and turning there. If you turn into Volunteer, then you got to go up speed humps, four-way
Right.
stop through the soccer complex to get there. So he projected that most traffic coming from the west would use that
As a more
entrance
direct
point.
entrance.
So Kirk, along those lines, and you all might remember, I'm kids of Woodland, but in a Woodland car line goes down to the light, up past Woodland, turns around, then Crockett Park comes in from the other side and goes around, and it's quite a process. This, like you said, is a shortcut to the park, but also would be shortcut into the Woodland.
Yeah, you don't know how much of it become, yeah, because right now I think they were actually staging in the parking lot of the indoor soccer complex, right? They are. And then coming
Okay.
back around.
So was that part of the analysis, and does this actually improve some of that, or does it make it worse, or was that kind of a separate thing since that's Williamson County Schools and it's only?
It really wasn't part of the analysis. I think it provides the opportunity for people to come in here. I think we'd have to figure out from the schools.
And the schools redesigned that a
How
half
you-
dozen times just in the time I know about.
Yeah, I mean, we've always partnered with the schools. We've never said, okay, you can't stage in the parks or whatever. I mean, I think you could, but that's not really our mode, so to speak. But it does disrupt them. I mean, at 2 PM, people are trapped in the park who are in there for park purposes. In order to get out, they can't get out because of the backup.
So this might be able to help.
It might, I mean, it might just,
Certainly on 4th of July.
we would, 4th of July would help a lot, which is why, in Greg's memo, you'll see he recommended somewhere between 186 and 212. And which is why we picked the 212, just because it just gives us more parking in the, in the park. What we wouldn't want to do, though, is see Woodland try to just say, okay, this is your primary route, everybody enter here and do this. We'd have to not let that be the case. So but it wasn't part of the analysis, but there's assumption that somehow or another this will become, if built, would become something of a route for the schools to somehow use. How it gets used, I'm not sure. So. Okay, so that's kind of the new stuff. Just real quick, updated total project cost. So that, again, you've got this attached. This is just the Racquet facility and the park office stuff, not road improvements. And it's just a hair under $15 million. And we'll break out for you in a minute how much is park office and how much is Racquet facility. But that's the updated cost, and again, not including any Park Crockett Road improvements. And you've got those details in your handout, and we'll publish this on the webpage. And that includes about a 10% construction contingency. And again, Brian has asked me to be very clear. These are just very preliminary. There's no engineering, no full design done, or no geotechnical work, so these are very preliminary numbers.
Well, what percentage can you expect this to increase by from
It's,
past experience building things?
well, I mean, I would expect it might increase some, yeah. I mean, there's
Well, of course, but I'm asking.
well, I'm just saying, there's a
do you have any
10%,
idea?
yeah, there's a 10% contingency in there. Does that all get absorbed plus more?
So that will cover those, you think?
Oh, I can't say
I
that.
think this goes as a range, right? Certain percent, it can be under or over. I think that's kind of the thought
Historically, we
process.
haven't unfortunately been under in this world these days, but there is some contingency in there. Whether that gets all absorbed plus some more,
So that could be another $1.5 million or not.
again, I don't want to say a number, but it could be higher, could be lower. Chances are it would more likely tend to be higher if it's different than lower, but still.
I remember that Brian in the Racquet, ad hoc Racquet Facility Committee meetings said that he hadn't gone over, you hadn't eaten up that contingency in any of your projects, is that correct? Fully?
Additionally, no, but Kirk is exactly right with the things that are still unknown to go in with that absolute assumption. I don't think it's gonna be to the extent that we're 20% over, but it could exceed that contingency if we get into some really bad subsurface conditions. So that's why to get married to that number for any reason, there's still a lot of detail that needs to be identified and studied before we get closer to that number. But it's our best attempt to give you something that we think is realistic.
Thank you.
Okay, so then again, that's just, and again, I've got a slide later that breaks it out, how much of this is, I think it's roughly 13 Racquet facility, 2 million park office. But that's kind of the realm we're working at today. So just to go back to the committee's report and their financials, just so, in their report, this is their report, they were showing $100,000 a year future structure replacement kind of allocation. to come up with a net revenue of 612. And that number came from our original number we threw out when we were talking with the county. So that, I mean, they got that kind of from us, so I'm not criticizing that at all. But when we talked with, and when the committee was meeting, we talked with them that if this was a fully city function, fully funded, that we would set it up as an enterprise fund. And so there's a different accounting mechanism relative to depreciation when it's an enterprise fund. So this is what, based, again, no change in the revenue estimates that came from the committee, but taking Brian's cost estimates and trying to think about how we would depreciate those. The fabric over the building would be a lower number of years than the rest of the building at 40 years. But just a rough idea in terms of, that depreciation number becomes about 330, and so that reduces the net revenue that then, the net revenue in theory is money that could be given back to the general fund or used for other city purposes. And so you would be reserving for all the future maintenance and replacement costs through this depreciation expense. And so the net revenue number comes down to about 383.
So this is the equivalent of the equipment replacement fund, if you were holding that depreciation money.
Kind of, yeah. So right now, we do the same thing for the water sewer fund, the emergency communications district fund, because they're all self-supporting with their own revenue, which in theory this is. And we still do it for this building, back from the days when we were renting space. We set this up as an enterprise fund. So those are the three you have today. So you, in those cases, under our accounting standards, you have depreciation, which is expensed but not spent. It's reserved.
You're actually
Building up a cash reserve to use towards all the future maintenance and replacement, whatever you need.
which is very different than private sector
Right.
depreciation.
Yeah, I don't know that I could.
Right, it is.
But that's the accounting standards we have to go by under our enterprise fund. So again, it's just not changing any of the revenue assumptions from the committee, just how we would eventually have to account for it as an enterprise fund.
And Kirk, when we're figuring the structural replacement costs and the money we're setting aside from that, I've heard from different people that have commented on this, that there's a difference between like replacing a bubble in terms of the process of how you replace it and reinflate it versus a tension-supported fabric roof versus a roof on a conventional building. Are we able to take a look at the actual process depending on the kind of construction we choose and what impact that makes on the future maintenance and or replacement? Or are we just using the same figure independent of the style of building?
Not that specific. Brian, if you want, yeah,
Sorry.
feel free to.
To answer part of your question, the fabric replacement would be a similar expense for either air-supported or tension fabric. Basic process, you would deflate the air-supported and you would replace the skin and reinflate the tension fabric structure. The structure would stay in place and it would, basically, they would take the fabric off and put the new one on the skeleton. So those two are similar. We have not looked at a conventional building, but from a depreciation perspective, the fabric on the two types of buildings we're looking at are similar to an EPDM roof. That's probably similar to what's on this building. And you have a similar life expectancy for those for replacement. So
I know that I don't think conventional buildings are really on the table, so we'd have to look into that if that became more realistic.
If a conventional building came online, you may have a similar replacement for the roof rather than the entire fabric, if that makes sense. So you would be planning to re-roof that building in a similar time frame that you're looking at fabric replacement on the other two building types.
So you're saying in this depreciation, you are pulling aside money each year for that replacement of
Yeah,
that
that
fabric,
money-
25 years out?
It'll show as an expense, which is why it reduces your net revenue, but you don't really pay it out to anybody. You're just reserving it
Right.
for that future maintenance and replacement.
That's 300,000 a year.
Based upon the way we so we depreciate, in this case, I took what Brian's number was for the cost of the fabric and the labor for installation in his estimate, which is about 350,000, and said that's 25 years for that. Then the rest of it the building, the parking, and everything, not including the parks part of it, because we'd have to try to separate that, because the parks office isn't the revenue-generating aspect of the building. So that's just the remainder of the Racquet facility costs, that 12.6 million over a 40-year life, which is our standard, Karen here, building depreciation schedule.
You get to the end of that schedule and the money does not need to be consumed for the actual replacement, then what happens to that remaining money that wasn't utilized to replace? Or let's say half of it needed to be used and it was replaced with half of the money that had been set aside.
Well, again, you'll be doing some maintenance throughout the life of it. Resurface, I mean, this would be where you resurface core or any, HVAC units and all that.
So it'll come all out of that, so we
Yeah, I don't know that we've ever got to the point where we've got to the thing where we've replaced everything and still had money left. We just never have got to that.
Okay,
But,
but it could happen.
I mean, I guess, I don't know, from an accounting standpoint, if you got to the point where your depreciation was in excess of what you felt you'd ever need to spend, is there a way to?
I'm not sure we've gotten to that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Because there is always ongoing maintenance and purchase and replacing things, but I guess it would go to the fund balance of that fund.
Thank you.
Of that fund, which is the,
Yeah, then I don't know what the procedures would be to try to move it from that fund to, like for this building, we have a cash balance in the municipal center fund, so not all, but about 2/3 of it is being used for the renovation we're talking about, still keeping some for the ongoing, because we're not replacing every HVAC unit of that. So that's an example of how it's being used.
yeah, I don't know how you would move from the enterprise
Yeah, I don't
fund
either.
because they're different parties to the general.
I think you'd have to do some kind of reserve analysis to
Yeah.
prove that you've got an excess amount.
I think as you're getting closer, because it sounds like you've done straight line depreciation. As you're getting closer to end of life, you're doing that reserve analysis and truing it up.
And we'd have to, get approval from the comptroller and that kind of stuff based upon some, not just, hey, we think we got more than we need, so we're going to move it.
Right.
Yeah.
Reserve analysis.
Yeah. Okay, again, this is just, nothing the committee did was wrong. It's just, this is now as we fine tune into it, if we're going to do it ourselves, this is kind of really how it would be accounted for. The other thing we looked at, just because, from a kind of a business model of things, what if we just borrow the money all and does it kind of pay for itself? And of course, we're hurt by interest rates going up in the last several months, but I asked our bond folks to just run me an analysis for a $12 million bond issue in early January based upon where the market was then, and the annual debt service on that would be about $850,000. And we're obviously not talking about borrowing at all, but just as a checkpoint, if we did
Whether we're
borrow.
borrowing it all or not, the future value of money, it's still the same thing.
You're not directly borrowing.
Pulling that out of your savings account or.
There's a cost of
borrowing it,
money,
There's
right.
cost of money regardless.
That money is fungible, so
Exactly.
So anyway, so that's kind of new information, I think, for y'all from the last time we discussed and you got the report. So kind of where we're at today, just kind of from our standpoint, from a staff standpoint, kind of questions we think kind of consider for your process going forward. And I'm going to run through several. I don't know that we necessarily intend for you to discuss all them now, but just kind of a thought process. We can come back to them at the end of the presentation. But, one is what additional public input process, if any, do you all feel is needed to make a decision? You've had the committee, which admittedly, by intention, was advocates for tennis and racquetball. You've heard some from people who question it, so I don't know what you all feel is needed from a public input process going forward before you make a decision.
Do you want us to say anything today or just think about
I'd
it?
rather come back to that at the end, maybe, if we don't mind. I don't want to get bogged down, especially with weather and all, and then we can go from there. What's the financial implications relative to other capital needs? We're going to go over some of that with you here shortly. Partnership with the county, is that still an option? I know some of you do not believe that's an option. Some would like. Just still throwing the question out there. Is this a community amenity or is it a financial investment? I think Our view is it should be considered more as an amenity. I don't think it's a financial investment. It certainly will generate revenue, but from a pay-for-itself type of investment, I just don't know how you get there. But that's for you all to decide. And then if
Girlbird song is calling.
as an amenity, then, normally speaking, when we look at things, new parks, trails, those kind of things, we look at what's the cost benefit of it for the population to be served in the community as a whole. What are the other capital project needs, which again, we'll go over here shortly. And then, historically, we're very conservative financially. So there's a lot of things we can pay for or afford to do that we just choose not to do. And so how does this rank in those, in that kind of realm of things? So those are thoughts that staff has in terms of how we get to a decision on it, how you get to a decision on this. You all may have other thoughts on things, but again, we'll kind of bring this slide back up at the end and you can have whatever discussion we have based upon time left and all that. So let's kind of jump into more details on the cost. And I've struggled a lot, to be honest with you here, how into the weeds to get relative to what money's available where. I'm probably going to get a little more into the weeds than maybe would need it, but this maybe will shorten our budget or capital discussion at the budget meeting in a couple weeks. But so here's the breakdown of that 14,964. Again, about 13 million on Brian's estimate is the Racquet facility itself. A little over 2 million is the park office area and the parking for the fleet. The Crockett Road access improvements, I got that memo from Greg yesterday. So I plugged in $1 million. It may be a little under, it may be a little more than that. That's a ballpark number. And the issue with there is that you got the widening of the road, but you've got, those of you who go to Whole Family know, all the utility lines are on that north side of the road, the overhead utility. We have a water line running on the north side of the road. I think Nolensville may have a water line on the south side. So the utility parts, potential costs in addition to just the road work. But for the sake of putting something in there, we plugged in $1 million. We'll need to get refined if we move forward. So all in, if we do the Crockett Road and we do the park offices, it's about $16 million. And again, not all in 1 year. Some of it's already out. So this is what's currently in our 6-year CIP that is programmed for that facility or the other uses, i.e. the park offices that would go with this facility. What's in red, this $4.5 million, that's been allocated this current year. That was all done last spring as part of the budget as we were working towards, at the time, the partnership with the county on a $12 million 50-50 deal. The CIP has programmed another $1.5 million next year that was to come, or is to come, from the unassigned fund balance of the general fund. And so all those numbers there would have got you to the $6 million, which at the time we did the CIP last year was half of the 12 we were talking with the county on that 50-50 project. Now, in addition, in the CIP, we do have a project for a park office building in Crockett Park. That's been in there for years. We keep kind of pushing it back, but it's in there. And that includes some money in 2025, really in 2026, from 2025 excess revenue, to finalize all the architectural work on it. And then there's a $5 million bond issue in 27 to build the park offices. So if you incorporate the park offices into this facility, then again, that's money that's in the CIP, maybe not in the right year, because that's a 2027 bond issue. You'd obviously need to do it sooner if we're going to move this project forward. But there is about $11.4 million somewhere in the 6-year CIP today that would be related to the facility with the park offices. Nothing for the road, of course. So that's what's there today. Any questions on that?
But this doesn't include like ARPA money? Or
No, this is just what you all approved in the CIP last year. We'll go through what ARPA's money, we'll get to all that, okay? All right, So then other projects, and I didn't get down into the $50,000 or $100,000 projects, just the other big capital projects we have in the next couple years that we know we're going to need extra money beyond what's already in the CIP. So we've got really these three big ones. Windy Hill Park, I mean, that's day, when are we bidding that? Hopefully in the next few weeks, right?
I've got a call on Friday to set those dates.
Okay, so that's ready to be bid. The last engineer's estimate that they tell us is conservative was about 4.5 million instead of the 3.25 we have today. So that's another $1.3 million. Ragsdale, which again, we're buying right away now, hope to bid this summer and start construction in the fall. Latest engineer's estimate on that would put us needing another $2.5 million there. And then Old Smyrna, we've had some talk about. And again, none of these are in 1 year. They're 2 or 3 year kind of phasing. But currently in the CIP, just like we did last year for the Racquet facility, we assumed there was going to be an Old Smyrna project. We didn't have any engineering to the point, but we did plug in $6 million for that over the next 2 to 3 years. The current estimate you had from Sullivan for just the western phase, not the whole project, just the west, like Harlan back to the roundabout, was I think 9.6 million. So that's another 3.5 million that's needed over the next 2 to 3 years, not tomorrow or not next year, but over the next 2 to 3 years. So that's another about $7.3 million on projects. Windy Hill and Ragsdale obviously are well along and are, again, to be bid in the next few months to 6 months.
What popped us up so much more on the Windy Hill for the 1 year?
Just
Everything.
time, cost, yeah.
And that size project, that's a pretty big
Yeah.
proportion.
In the end, you gotta remember that some of these estimates, we kind of just ballparked at the time before, the engineering got finalized and all that, so. And sometimes I guess our ballparking just isn't keeping up with the market, so to speak. The other thing as we get into construction, I don't know about parks or roads, but certainly buildings, there's a concern in the market and is once that Titan Stadium gets going, it's gonna suck up a lot of contractor availability. And what does that do to the market? I don't know. I'm sorry. Good question.
I know we voted on Windy Hill Park to be in its process, but we haven't yet voted on Old Smyrna. And where in the Ragsdale have we voted on what part of that have we
You
voted?
voted for the full design, you voted to acquire right away.
Okay, but we haven't voted to spend the money on construction yet,
We haven't bid it yet.
right? So,
Well, it needs to be done. I can.
Yeah, I mean, I
go
can-
on
I'm
it
just
4,
questioning,
5, 6 times
I'm
a
not
day.
saying it doesn't need to be done, I'm just curious
Yeah.
where we are in our vote.
Yeah, and you're right. Each of these has different phases. Usually there's an
Timeframes.
engineering phase, and then depending on roads, there's gonna be a right-of-way phase, and then there's gonna be a
And I
construction.
know that most of us understand that, but there are people in the room that may not, and so I'm asking some of my questions
Yeah.
for folks who come.
But yeah, you've approved it in the CIP, you've approved the engineering work for it, you've approved the purchase of the right-of-way. So once that's complete here in the next few months, the next step is to bid it and then bring that contract to you.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
And Windy Hill, of course, you bought the property, approved the engineering, the master plan, and now we're bidding it, yeah. Old Smyrna, you've approved that preliminary engineering design, and then the next step would be a full engineering contract if you want to keep moving that project forward. Construction wouldn't be in probably until realistically the beginning of 25 or mid-25. Again, that's why all this is really a puzzle. There's multiple funding pots, there's multiple years, and we have some control to kind of, well, we can push that, others need to happen, it's not as simple as X dollars then and go from there. But anyway, so that's that number. I'm just following myself along so I know what's coming, so I don't get surprised. So if we go back to there, the gap there between this almost 16 million and 11.4 is about 4.6 million. And another so roughly $12 million over the next 2 to 3 years of capital stuff that we need to find the money for, assuming the Racquet facility goes forward. It's kind of that target number. And again, multiple sources. So it's just really for the benefit, you all know this, but for the benefit of the people in the room and who might look at this, is where do we get our money for capital projects? The bulk of it comes from our own excess revenue each year. As you know, we're very conservative in our general fund operations, and with the growth of the sales tax revenue from the increase and just the online sales tax, the amount of excess revenue we have each year is significant. So that gets rolled forward every year for capital projects.
Just historically, is that 1 million a year, 5 million a year? Does it
I'm going to
vary?
show you, but
Okay, great, thanks.
10 years ago, it was 2 or 3 million. Now it's 13 or 14 million.
Thank you.
But I've got all that coming for you.
Thank you.
But that's the primary one. Then obviously we do borrow money from time to time. We try to keep it planned, and so it doesn't obviously impact the tax rate or impact our annual debt service. As we pay off debt, we take more on it, try to keep it fairly level. Then we do have the fund balance, a healthy fund balance, and we'll go over what that is here shortly. Intergovernmental sources, oftentimes that would be federal money on roads or whatever, or if we were to do a project with the county, that would have been a source here had that been there. Private sources, we get that from time to time. Example would be the ball fields where the ball club has given us money, or the Rotary raised money for the playground. It's an example of private sources.
Whole funds, library.
Yeah, exactly. Then within our capital projects fund, which is where we put all the money for the big projects, we've had some pretty healthy interest earnings the last couple of years on that fund that they're not allocated to any project. So there's some fund balance there that probably can be a couple $1 million almost to be allocated to projects. And then there are other projects that are funded that either maybe get pushed back because they're not ready, or you all change your mind about doing them. So we'll look at some of those projects and where there might be some moving of projects around to have some more money available in the next couple of years and that kind of stuff. But those are always an option. As you know, our 6-year CIP is an ever-evolving document. The first year is usually pretty well planned and funded. The next 5 will change each year as we update it. So that's not uncommon for us to say that project's not ready, maybe we don't need it yet, that kind of thing. Art funds, so we'll talk about that. That's a unique one, but that is something that we've got, and we need to have a plan to move that forward. County adequate facilities tax, we generally use that for parks. Actually, a part of the $4.5 million that's in the budget already for the Racquet facility was $1 million of adequate facilities tax. So we've already used some of that. So that's there. Road impact fees really aren't applicable here because I don't think you would use that towards.
Unless you did it for the entrance.
Yeah, but that's not really adding capacity to existing roads. It's adding capacity to serve a new development. So I don't know that that would be an appropriate use of it. Plus, they're pretty well programmed and on the big road projects. Obviously, you can't use utility revenues. We wouldn't use our equipment replacement, any of that kind of stuff on this, or any of the enterprise fund money's not available for it. So that's a ramp. So to move this forward on that, and again, I'm looking at it at that 12 million number, not just the Racquet number, because that to me is the whole picture. So these are really the funding sources that you'd be looking at, I think, in red to try to fill that $12 million gap. And we'll go through most of these here. It's a little bit of detail, maybe a little more detail than some people prefer on some of this, but so let's talk about excess general fund revenues. So we have a 5-year financial model that we kind of use to this. So we take all of our historic, for the last however many years now, 10, 12 years, of annual revenues, annual budgets, and then we kind of assume a certain growth factor in all the different revenue line items based upon historical factors, and kind of project out a 5-year model that helps us figure out how much of this excess revenue we think we are going to have available each year to program into the CIP. So this is a summary of that whole model. So for the current year, we're in 2024. The model projects that we'll generate general fund revenue about $69.7 million. We're actually not going to achieve that. Growth is just, it's slow. When you hear it at the state level, we're seeing a little bit too, and we'll go over some numbers. I mean, we're not going to be dramatically, but we won't hit that number. But to be safe, we already factor in just a cushion. Let's just say, okay, take 5% off the top and just say that's our cushion in case we have a downfall. So that then gets you to what's your net projected general fund revenue. And then we take what's our general fund budget today, subtract those, and that's kind of what you get in terms of what we would project for next year to be available from an excess revenue standpoint. Now, don't get excited because most of that's already been programmed already. So that's not new money we found today for new projects, most of that. And we'll go over that in detail here. But again, this just kind of rolls forward, assumes a certain amount of growth and a reasonable growth in our expenditure budget too. So back to your question, that shows you there somewhere in the model today would show about $14 million a year with this cushion still built into it too. And again, years ago, we were happy when we were being able to transfer $3 or $4 million. But a lot of this is the half-cent sales tax, which you all agreed should be primarily dedicated to capital. And then again, just the increase in the effect of the online sales tax collections primarily.
We had the hall tax that were.
Yeah, the hall tax went away.
Yeah, it was good for a while and then disappeared. But.
So, again, liquor taxes have been up for the last several years and those kind of things. And so it's just, it's a consumer-based economy for us in terms of sales tax and liquor taxes and hotel taxes and such, so. But anyway, so that's the model as it kind of sits today based upon where we were, 9, 10 months ago adopting the CIP. But what I want to say here is, again, I think you all expect us to be conservative in what we project, and so not get overly excited about money, and you'd rather have the money come in unexpectedly and then spend it as opposed to plan to spend it and have it not come in.
I can't remember being disappointed.
And how conservative?
We are always very conservative, and we always exceed expectation. The years that I've been around. Am I wrong?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I remember when I first was elected, we had $620,000 in a fund balance, and it was because we spent the next 30 years. Mike Walker was wonderful at leading a conservative budget. You pay as you go when you can. It didn't come easy.
Right.
It really did not. It initiated the CIP, so we planned ahead. It initiated the maintenance fund, so we planned ahead. There's a reason, and it's not just that things cost more, that we have a fund balance like this.
No
It's
question.
not just more money coming in, it's that we've been very careful about what money goes out, and we look at projects very, very, very carefully. We don't jump into a big expenditure without a lot of thought from our boards and not just a citizen committee. We have had no input from the park board whatsoever. And I don't know why we have a park board if we can't depend on them. I hear how smart our citizens are here. Our park board's smart. Our staff is smart. I haven't heard anything from the staff except how we would possibly pay for an already foregone conclusion. The tail is wagging the dog on this project.
When I was first elected in 2009, not long after I took office, for 14 straight months, revenues kept decreasing. And we were worrying about whether we were going to have to lay off employees, which Brentwood, since they've always worked clean, at least the last 30, 35 years. So that has always been forefront in my mouth and my mind, and being conservative about whatever we do and projected revenues. As a businessman, I look at this, Lord willing, it doesn't happen, but if we have an all-out war in the Middle East, gas spikes up to $8, $10, $12, $15 a gallon, which could be a possibility if something like that happened, especially since our oil production's been cut back so far in our country. All these numbers change, and so that's why I want us to be very, very conservative about anything we do on what's considered a want. It's not a need. It's not like sewer, it's not like roads. It's a want of some in the community. So I agree, I appreciate the conservative, and hopefully our city will continue to be that conservative. That's how my business survived a pandemic, which greatly affected when people went from driving 30,000 miles a year to 2,000 or 3,000 miles a year. You don't get a lot of car work. Didn't have to lay off any staff. It suffered greatly and bled a lot of red, but had a lot of reserves because we've been in business almost 100 years. I'm the fourth generation. I think the project, and talking with a couple of developers, I think it'll actually be even much more than what these figures are once they start doing the construction, start doing excavations, because tennis courts, like basketball courts and those types of things, take a real special excavation. It has to be perfectly level so that it can be used, and perfectly level for years. So, and I agree, I think all this information is good, but I think we tread very slowly and carefully before we embark on something of this nature. And the more I look at the numbers and see, the more I feel that way. People are wanting to take money from road projects that have been needed for years that to do what is considered a want. So
Curfew is still going though. Can we usually have more?
You got more than.
So again, this is kind of where the model sat a year ago. We were current CIP, but again, as I said, general fund revenues this year they're not down, they're just not at the same growth level they have been. Right now, our projections would be, we'll end this year about at a 1% to 2% growth in general funds revenues. The average is a little under 5% over the last 10 years. So, and you can see it's obviously not a consistent line. So we don't know, does this number flatten out? Does this number back up? But in our financial model, when you plug in 24 actuals, that kind of resets the model a little bit lower than what it was before, and then that plays itself out a little differently. So again, this is kind of where the model is at today in terms of these projected revenues of excess revenue. And then this is what's programmed in the CIP already. As I said, don't get excited that there's $16 new million. The CIP already spends about that amount of it. So there's some unallocated money today in the projections for this year that could be moved forward to next year. Not as much next year from there. And then later out in the CIP where we don't have as many things programmed, obviously the numbers look better, but I'm not really looking at 3 years or 4, 5, 6. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3. So that's still current. So if you say, okay, but take what we're actually projecting in 24 to be, plug those in the model and then run it out, obviously the numbers get a little different. You'll see those numbers. We're still do fine this year because we're at the point where we can kind of take out that fudge factor because we got 6 to 7 months of revenues. So we'll do okay this year and actually have maybe a little bit more available this year. But if you let the model run out, instead of 14.2, it's 12 million because we reset with 24 lower numbers. So we don't have as much in these next couple of years in terms of excess revenue. So there's some this year to help fill that $12 million gap if all those projects went forward, but not really much in the coming years unless you start pushing projects out. Again, a little bit more into the minutia maybe than you want, but just the idea that we didn't want to just look at last year's model. We want to take our experience so far this year, plug that in the model, and project out in terms of how we would do things. So you say, what's in these $13, $12 million numbers that we've already got programmed in the next 3 years? Well, I know this is kind of small. You got it in front of you, but this is the projects those monies are projected on over the next 3 years. Again, some are relatively small dollar things, and I don't We can go through them one by one. I don't really think that's the need here. But some Racquet work, that's a playground and a potential amphitheater re-roof. Again, that's an example of a project that we kind of keep pushing back because the roof looks okay. So that's money can be moved around. City Hall, we got the extra, we're going to bid that here next week. That's the extra needed to get to that 5.7 number that a majority of you were supportive of. Service Center project is one that's, it's not ready. We're having a lot of discussions about what we really want or need to do there and can afford to do there. So that's some money that project gets moved back and frees up some money. And again, I won't go through all these bigger other ones. Obviously, Ragsdale, we've got money over the next couple years because it's a 2-year construction project. Trails, a lot of that is the trail between Concord and Murray along Franklin Road. I think that's a question as to whether that's the cost benefit and the amenity, kind of like I talked on the front end. Is it an amenity or a financial? That's one y'all will decide whether that amount of money for making that bike ped connection, that's a gap now between south of Concord and north of Concord. So that's a project that, even if we decide to move forward, probably is not at a point where that needs that much money this year. Again, another one of those examples where each year we kind of move some money around. You'll see here in Split Log Phase 3, we're already starting to reserve money for it, even though it's not planned for construction for about 5 years. And then Old Smyrna, there's money there to keep moving the engineering money along. And then that's the other $6 million that's in the CIP today that would need to be added to over the next couple of years. So again, that's those projects that make up these numbers here. Go into the details, but just so you understand the level of kind of where we sit.
2.6 million on that.
Franklin Road
Franklin
from
Road to Murray.
Murray to Concord,
Along Franklin Road from Murray to Concord, yeah.
which all we've done on that process is vote to approve an engineering study.
Engineering.
And they haven't come back with that.
We've got, where's Derek? We've seen,
Hey, how's it going?
we've seen, engineering-wise, they're at preliminary, or where are we at on the engineering of that?
Yeah, completing preliminary design just prior to right-of-way plans. That's where we're at right now.
So we would have to acquire right of way on that still.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying, that's not at a point, even if everybody was, and I know some of you will question whether $2.5 million for a trail is right or not. But even if we were moving forward with it, you probably don't need 2.6 million out of next year's money for it. You know what I'm saying? That's an example of a project that probably moves back a little bit and money moves around. Does that answer your
It does. And I would just like to point out, like I did in another briefing back last year, that there already is a trail that covers that same distance. I walked it and run it, connection between neighborhoods. It's not a trail, but it's a connection between neighborhoods. So we do already have connectivity for people to walk and ride bikes to that same effective length of Franklin Road.
but not on the east
How
side.
about through Brentwood Hills? Is that better yet? Allison,
I'm sorry,
they're referring to the area of the roads in Brentwood Hills.
what would be Fountainhead, Brentwood Hills, Jackson Lane, all that. There's a way to get through all of that area already on foot and bike if you choose to.
So down like West Concord Road and some of that area.
Stewart,
Okay, so that's kind of excess revenue. That's where a lot of our revenue comes from capital. Where are we at on our unassigned fund balance? The audit shows we have 55.5 million of the unassigned fund balance in the general fund, which is 107% of our current fiscal year 24 budget. Our adopted policy requirement is 40%, which would be 20.7 million. So you subtract those two, and essentially you've got 34.8 million on the unassigned fund balance above our minimum requirements. I don't think anybody would talk about spending $34.8 million, but there is 7.5 of that already programmed in the CIP. 1.5 for the Racquet facility in the CIP that was adopted. And then there's 6 million that's been programmed for years for McEwen, east of Wilson Pike. That's program 2 or 3 years out. So you already got some of that kind of earmarked to be spent in the current CIP. So that would leave 27.3 million in the fund balance that could be spent and still stay above your 40% minimum. Again, never would we ever come close to recommending spending anywhere near that amount, but some. And we have, we've used that from time to time when we bought Windy Hill, way back when we bought Smith Park. So, it's not unprecedented to dip into that fund balance. But you would never
What
want
is the maximum we pulled out of that for one project? You can, I'll give you
5 million or so?
You can take 5 million.
or so,
right.
roughly.
Exactly.
That was for Smith Park.
I think so, yeah. Because Windy Hill, we did some, but we also used some adequate facilities, and I don't think it was.
And there's 400 acres at Smith Park.
Yeah,
20 now, isn't there?
That was a pretty good deal.
it was 380, and or 320, and we bought the back 80, so 400.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we may have used it for the
What
back
year,
80.
but that was 5 million, in what year?
Roughly.
Ballpark.
2010, 2011.
I think.
There's a lot of numbers been moving on the screen here.
I know,
So
that's what I was afraid.
The available 27 million, we still have funds, like it costs 15, 16 million, we're talking for the facility, Racquet facility. But we have part of that. It's not like you're talking 15 million out of this, you're talking.
No, I'm just saying, all this, there's different buckets
Gotta get
that
all those buckets over to see.
take some from different
Yeah.
ones, is what I'm saying.
So,
I'm just trying to paint you the picture, kind of what those
No,
buckets look like.
I agree. It's just, I just don't want people to think all of that 16 has to come out of the
No,
27.
no.
I don't want to paint such a pretty picture either. And you all know how I felt about it. I'm one of those advocates for a city-county joint thing, where we had half that amount that was coming from the city of Brentwood. It doesn't matter what buckets we get it from. We're gonna eventually have to put the money back in those buckets. It's not free money, as he said. You spend it today or you spend it 10 years. It's just like a household budget. If the roof needs fixed and the carpet needs replaced and the car needs to be replaced, you might juggle it a few years, but you're gonna eventually spend that amount of money. And we need to keep that in mind. Is this that good of a deal when we could have had a really good deal? And I'm not making a secret, everybody who's talked to me knows I feel this way. For no good reason, except people wanted to have guaranteed tennis times. We turned down a deal where we could put in half of this amount. So that's where I'm coming from. And I don't care how many buckets we get it from, I just can't see myself ever voting for this project. And I'm just gonna be upfront about it.
I just want to hear, I'm still open to
Oh,
listening
well,
to
I'm
this.
glad. I'm
and I
just
wanna
trying to
see
be
the
clear that
numbers
I'm not
and-
still
and-
open. I'm
okay,
very
but
adamantly for the other project.
I'm just stating, I just want to make sure, just to clarify, because there's been a lot of numbers put up there. All I'm doing is clarifying numbers. I'm not saying anything on which way we should go or could go. We still got 3 or 4 more slides to go for Kirk, so there'll be more numbers up there.
It's not gonna change the fact that we're still talking X number of dollars that's gotta be spent, so.
And then I want to just recognize, I think you bring up a couple really good points. One is by having some money in the bank, it allows you to take advantage of opportunities that you didn't expect. And Kirk mentioned a couple with Windy Hill Park and Smith Park. That if you didn't have money in the bank, then whether or not those opportunities came up, you wouldn't be able to do anything about it if you didn't have the resources. And the other that you brought up in terms of having a partner, because we're not just talking about the money due the day you commit. We're also talking about money over time,
Right.
And whether or not you have somebody committing to the maintenance and the upkeep. So like the Brentwood Ball Club and the turf fields, part of the advantage is they've committed to the maintenance, which is huge for the city because, committing to long-term unknowns like the maintenance cost is a big difference versus committing the cost right now. So I think you make a couple of really valid points that are very, very important. Ken, I agree, we need to continue the presentation. But,
Let's just hear the rest of it.
Okay, so we've talked about excess revenues, we've talked about the fund balance. We didn't really talk about debt, but then there's a bond issue in there that I assume would just go towards the project for the park office park. But ARP funds are, again, a unique set of money that's not a recurring thing. So if you remember, again, a lot of numbers here. We got about $12.7 million. We allocated 5 to the sewer tank. That's been spent, paid, fully operational. We have earmarked in the CIP $3 million between now and 2026 for Todd to do his storm drain pipe rehab throughout the city, the old metal pipes that we showed you pictures of. We haven't spent a lot of that, although I don't know if he's still here. I think he left. The contractor, I think, is either in town or coming in town soon, so we would hope to still keep that $3 million allocated towards that pipe rehab between now and 2026 when it's got to be spent.
It has to be under contract by 2026.
Yeah, and we have a contract
Okay.
with the company that does it, so we just got to spend it by 2026 then.
And then if there's, I don't know, $500,000 that doesn't get spent on that, can it be put under contract for something else?
Yes.
And the 11th month of 2026?
We don't want to lose it.
Yes, and we're going to get to that.
Okay, sorry.
I don't think we want to lose it either. I don't think we will. So, now, then in the CIP, we have about $2.5 million of undesignated money in stormwater for stormwater projects that were going to come out of the master plan work that's been done, you recall? And we talked a little bit about that really didn't give us, it gave us a lot of like road things that we're not quite sure really make sense. So, I think we would want to keep some money somewhere in the CIP for stormwater projects as they're identified. And there may be a few still coming out of that. Derek and them are going to try to get a couple consultants on board to look at that, but nothing that's going to get under contract between now and the end of this calendar year. And then we did do the master plan work. We did the phase 1. That's what was spent on that. There's still that amount of left. We're not really advocating at this point to kind of move forward to phase 2 until we see what projects might come out of the phase 1 stuff. So bottom line, we have committed in the CIP 11.1 million. We spent 5.5. That leaves about 5.6 remaining to be spent. Again, we would want to try to keep that 3 million allocated somewhere. But we really have about $1.5 million, $1.6 million that we haven't allocated in the CIP yet. That's sitting in a fund earning interest at a pretty good clip. So you got about $2 million that's unallocated of the original 12.7 today. That number may be a little higher. That interest number is probably a couple months old. So if you take the 2 or so that's unallocated and try to move the stormwater money up and let local money fund that a little later. So you know, somewhere $4 to $5 million you can kind of move around here to help fill that $12 million gap. And back to my comment about the ARP money and the deadlines, what we actually may recommend to you to do is we've got Windy Hill and Murray Lane coming up. We may recommend that we have the money. It's lost revenue, so we have a wide discretion. Lost revenue is one of the categories under the ARP fund of how that's used. You could even use it for operating costs, which we would never want to do. What we might want to do to get it spent is designate Windy Hill and Murray Lane or whatever that are going to be coming up under contract here sometime in the next 12 months, that the ARP money's going there, and then just take our money that we've got allocated for those projects and then move them as needed. Just moving money from one pot to the other, same amount of money going around. So just to get it under contract and spent, and
Right, for the purpose to ensure no money gets
that we
left on
don't
the
get to send
table.
any money back to the
Right.
federal government.
Right.
Whatever, yeah. So
That's great. Thank you for
understand
sharing that with us.
Windy Hill is a little competing thing because technically we got some bond money we need to get spent too, but I'd rather pay a little arbitrage because we earn more interest than send money back to the federal
Right.
government.
Yes,
So
thank
that's the outcome of that. So again, I toyed with the idea of just showing a slide with a bunch of puzzle pieces because that's really what all this is. And your points are valid. It still doesn't matter. You're still spending a certain amount of money for a project. Money's coming from different places. So that's the ARP funds. So that's really all the main pots of money that we would be working with here in the CIP. So just,
Fun, kind of unexpected money, grand total
yeah,
was
12.7. And again, there's separate ARP funds that the Water Sewer Fund is getting from the state and through Williams County, but those are dedicated to water sewer.
Those are
projects.
additional on top of this 12
Yeah,
number.
right. So just to kind of summarize, I mean, the bottom line is today's estimates is you're looking at a Racquet facility and associated improvements that would be $16 million. So that's the bottom line on, that's really your question is do you want to spend $16 million on a Racquet facility? We've got other projects that need money too. About 70.
16 million on a Racquet facility, or does that include?
Well, that includes park offices and the Crockett. It's 13 million on a Racquet facility. But you wouldn't do, now eventually you might have to do the park offices on our own at some point in time. You wouldn't do the road connection unless you were doing the Racquet facility. I mean, I guess you could if we felt we needed another entrance into Crockett Park, so. But bottom line is that's still the amount of money you would be spending to move, if the project moves forward. Other projects, at least another 7.3 million we need in the near term on those. You've got other big projects out in the CIP that are gonna need probably additional money too. Split Log Phase 3 and Sunset Phase 3 and those things, but they're in that 3, 4, 5 year, 4, 5, 6 year range. So roughly 12 million is kind of where we're looking at today. You'd have to move a bond issue earlier to go towards the Racquet facility, which is in the CIP, but it's in 27. So you'd have that money part of that money would come from a bond issue.
parks stuff.
Pardon?
For the parks part, you're saying that was the bond issue that you were considering taking anyway for the
That's what it's
Parks
been
Department.
programmed.
It's been programmed for park offices, so if that's gonna be part of the project, you would just take that 5 million and make it part of your funding for the project is what we would propose. And again, just to clarify, Windy Hill and Ragsdale, we feel those, construction estimates are a little more refined. The Racquet facility in Old Smyrna are just very preliminary, so those could fluctuate considerably over time.
Can you go back just a minute? The third bullet point, additional funding needed if all projects proceed, is 12 million. So that's the 16 plus the 7.3.
No, it's the difference between the 16 and the 11.4 that's already in the CIP somewhere.
Okay.
So that's 4.6
Okay,
plus the 7.3
okay.
gets you
But
to
that
12.
12 million include, that's the slide where you said some of the stuff could shift. For example, like we hadn't even on the bike trail
Well,
on
the 12 million,
Franklin Road north of Concord, that was 2.5 million. That 12 million includes that 2.5 million of things that you were already kind of identifying we could shift later because like we don't even have the land for that.
well, I'm saying the 12 million is the gap for those projects.
Right.
So how would we fill that gap? Either because we have a little more excess revenue than we projected, we have some money in the capital projects fund capital balance, or we move projects around to receive money, or again, those are all the different pockets that could be used to fill a $12 million gap, if that's the number.
Well, we could go out for a bond issue and then put it to a referendum. And if it's such a popular idea, maybe it would pass, and then I'd step back and keep my mouth shut.
Well, I mean, you do have this $5 million bond issue that we would say would be part of the project. You can't just do a referendum to.
I know, it has to be with the bond,
A
that's
bond
why I
issue would
said
be,
that.
A bond issue
I
is
understand that,
the way to
we've
do it.
done that before.
We did it before with Mallory Lane.
We sure did.
Back in the early 2000s.
I'm just saying, if it's so popular, then the public will say, let's spend that money, and we can all be comfortable with that decision. and they'll vote to issue those bonds.
That's
So
an
I'm just tossing that out when we're talking about buckets we can pull money from.
Okay, I mean, that is an option, yes. Back to that question about public input needed. But, so bottom line is, again, we need clear direction on your project priorities. And then based upon that, we'll use these buckets of money and we'll present to you our proposed CIP for adoption later this spring.
What is the date of the CIP meeting?
February 1st.
Everyone.
February.
Well, February 1 is just the budget
That's
kickoff.
the budget. When's the
We
CIP?
would then, we would produce the CIP document by the middle of March. And then we would review it with you, I think it's first week of December or something like that.
Don't you feel like I need to see that, I think, in its entirety before I could really say what buckets I
I
should
guess
go.
what I'd like a little bit to see is now that you've done all these slides, on the summary slide is, you know, we've got the ARPA money, kind of a dollar value of what we, you know, because in essence, you're saying, well, the gap is 12 million. Well, kind of, ARPA money was in excess 12 million anyway. Granted, it's being allocated elsewhere, but I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
you got
that's-
about 4.
Right,
so.
right, so that's what's left over in ARPA that, you know, we would pull. I'd like to see a summary of the buckets, the ballpark of the buckets of what we're talking pulling from ARPA, what we're talking pulling from general fund unassigned balance, things like that. to
Not 12
meet that
million
gap.
left over, there was what, 1.5, and then interest was about 2 million
Well, the ARPA,
unallocated.
yeah, but
It's
you,
not really left over, it's just unallocated.
yeah, you got 2 million here, a little more than that. And again, you could also take some of the unspent stuff that is allocated and put
Right.
it towards it, or you could put it, right, so that's why I'm getting about 4.7. or so.
Right. So I guess on that summary thing, it would help if it's all in one page, to kind of have a ballpark there.
And that, I mean, that's fine, it's gonna, I mean, when I put general fund undesignated balance at 27 million, it's gonna look, you know what I mean? That's what I'm saying, I can tell you that, but really what we need is, you tell us what projects you wanna do when, and then we'll piece together the process. If you're asking me, out of those pots of money, can we find $12 million over the next 2 to 3 years? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
The question you need to answer is, for this particular thing, is do you want to spend $16 million on this project? The other projects, I would argue, you don't have a choice on. They're already well underway. And I know people talk about Old Smyrna. I just don't know how you could truly sit there and say Old Smyrna doesn't need to be done. But you could choose to do that.
But like on the, if we go back to that kind of detailed slide where you said, I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but there was some stuff where you had already identified, we could shift these things several slides back.
Yeah.
If you'll go to that one, I don't,
I may have to. This,
okay, yeah. So, you know, like the other trails and sidewalk school connections 2.6, right there. You
Yeah.
know, so that pulls that number down.
and this service center number would.
Right, right, so that's several million right there already. That without taking away from a need, you know, we're still meeting all the needs. Those are more wants. A trail along Franklin Road, north of Concord, is a want. Service center is a want. We're not touching road improvements, those are needs. You're still pulling off 3 million plus, which you've identified, right?
Right.
And then again, we're really talking about finding $6 million, or $5 million, $4 million, $5 million, right? I mean, everything else, when we would look at this slide, updated total project cost, we have money allocated for all these things, our total of 11 million. And so if the total sum of the project is 16, then we're talking about 5 million. Is my math right?
Roughly.
So 5 million truly is what we're looking for that hasn't already been planned for. And we just discussed how 3.5 of that may be moving out several years for the trail on Franklin Road, that all these other things, the service center, that's another 3.5 million. They may be moving out farther. So it looks like that's pretty easy to find without having to go into debt. Or
Well, no, that's $5 million of debt and
Sure,
that
but
$11 million
that-
number.
Right, but that new piece that we're looking, the new piece, the undesignated
Oh,
piece.
the
right,
difference, yes.
Right, yeah. And the debt that was planned was for the Parks Board, and it's been in the plan for a long time. The Parks Building, it's been in the plan for a long time. That's not new or incorrect debt or unexposed. It's not inappropriate debt. It's a planned debt from lots of reasons.
Yeah, it's planned, whether we would have, again, you could argue this either way.
Sure,
'Cause
sure.
if we don't do this project, then we probably don't need to borrow money for the park office building. I mean, you could argue it either way. It really does come down to, I'm just kind of, do you all want to spend what's estimated to be $16 million for an indoor racket facility and the associated costs and associated things? Is that really where you want to spend that amount of city money right now? And if it is, we just need to know that, and we'll tell you how to piece it together relative to other needs and everything else. But that's, the first question needs to be answered.
So backing up to your slide on decision-making going forward, one of your bullets on that is it a community amenity or a financial investment? Because I know at times people have been saying, hey, we're gonna make money on this, we're investing. But, if you take the numbers and say you round up the free cash flow, I hate to call it a profit because this isn't a profitable venture, but the free cash flow, you guys had it, we figured at $300 and some odd thousand dollars. Say if that's $400,000, take it up. And say if you build this or Mayor Gorman said, for $13 million, you don't count the road, you don't count that. And if you assume that you can do that $400,000 every year as a perpetuity, the value of a perpetuity is that free cash flow divided by the amount you spend to buy that cash flow. And that comes out to about 3%. So a 3% return on investment for that, or return on capital, when prime rate right now is, I think, 8.5%. So that's the base prime rate at the banks. So can we agree, first off, as 7 commissioners, that this is an amenity and not a financial investment? This is something we're just doing flat out as an amenity versus other spending choices. Is there anyone that that disagrees with that?
Yeah, I do.
I do.
Okay.
I think it could be it can be an amenity, but it can be a service too. It's just.
Well, that's an amenity as a service, but can we agree then that it's not a financial investment?
No, because with the work with the ad hoc committee, the report was very thorough. And I would like to say at this point that in the meetings that I attended, which was all of them for the ad hoc committee as the liaison, we discussed the opportunity of a fund, of it being an enterprise fund for sure, but it wasn't brought to the committee that the depreciation would be exactly this. There was talk about the depreciation. I'm sure the committee would have really enjoyed having that piece of information plugged in before their report was finalized. So, and I know at the end of the meetings, they asked if there was any more input from city staff, and city staff attended almost all the meetings, specifically the first ones when the pro forma was being developed. So I'm sure that they would have really appreciated that piece of information so that their report could have been technically more accurate. But as we've discussed earlier, there is profit brought out of this, and unlike a bike trail or anything in our parks with our fields, those are not profit generating. In fact, in our Parks Department, our cost recovery is 10%. And so this situation with tennis and our indoor racket sports with pickleball and tennis does actually bring in revenue. It does pay for all of its cost. It does take care of rebuilding the roof and taking all those things. It does pay for that. So it is a financial investment. And an amenity, which I think is a beautiful combination, especially using tax dollars, borrowing tax dollars for the people who would use the facility. And with the ad hoc committee's work from their report, and then, of course, people have come to me outside of that, just people in the public. It looks like at a very conservative estimate, there are 7,000 people who are residents of Brentwood who either play tennis or pickleball on an active basis. So for 7,000 people in the city to be able to participate in an activity that then takes care of paying for itself, and takes care of all of its long-term maintenance, short-term maintenance, is something unique to our city that we do not currently have. Nothing else in our city does that. So it's exciting to think about a new way of thinking, and I know it's a new way of thinking for people to get their brain around that, and it's a lot to understand. I mean, this presentation this morning, we're an hour and a half in, it's just one piece of it all. The ad hoc committee spent hours and hours with extremely highly qualified individuals on that team. 45 people wanted to be on that team. So there's a lot to understand, and it's hard to understand all of this in one meeting. So I appreciate those of you who have come and those of you who are watching online to try to learn more about this and see the decisions that we'll have to make, because it isn't a simple decision. And Kirk, I appreciate you and Jay and all the work you've done. Dave Bunt, I appreciate your team and all you've done. There's members of the ad hoc committee here. I appreciate what you've done. Karen, on your area of finance, thank you for what you've done to put it all together so that we can make the most informed decision. It's the reason why back in June, we voted to defer the vote just to stop, to get more information. We took technically 4 months to learn more information before the Racquet Committee presented their finding, and we've got more data here today. So I just want to say again, a public thank you to everyone who's put their time and effort into this so that we can make the best decision possible.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comments, Commissioner Spears, in terms of that. I mean, I feel like you just described an amenity. And what I was asking about is question number 4, an amenity versus a financial investment, which I think is not really a new concept and is well understood and is fairly easy to wrap your mind around. And I just want to point out that, I mean, the number I'm looking at, like in the ad hoc committee proposal, the number they're showing, say for net revenue for future structural replacement, or net revenue after future structural replacement is 612, 615 annually. So that would be a 4.7% return on capital versus, the prime rate of 8.5%. And if you just take the biggest number they've got, which is just the net revenue, $712,000 a year, divided by the 13 million, which is just the Racquet facility itself, that'd be a 5.48% return. So if at some point, I know it's, I don't know that you or the committee's set right now to, I guess, address that, but I guess I don't understand how, by any stretch, it's a financial investment. But I'm willing to talk about it as an amenity. I was just trying to clarify that question number 4, is it an amenity versus a financial investment, because I think it's clearly an amenity. And I was hoping we could just agree on that. And if it is an amenity, then how we go forward making that decision.
Well, if you turn to page 6 of the committee's report, we're the largest zip code in the state of Tennessee that plays tennis. We've lost 23 courts. There's people that youth cannot get on a waiting list. All the waiting lists are full for them to do this. So if we're talking today, we either do it or we don't do it. And we don't have a partner in this thing. There's no offer on the table to partner with anybody. So we decide today we either do it or don't do it. If you decide not to do it, you're not going to replace those tennis courts. Williamson County has got a temporary solution at the Y, but that's going to go away. We all know that's going to go away. Highwoods is not going to just all of a sudden say, we're going to give you that property. So to take care of this segment of the population, the loss of 23 courts, and you can have a facility that makes a little bit of money, but pays for itself, has all the maintenance taken care of, that's where I think we are on this. And I think did a good job of showing those numbers, how we can move things around. And I like that. I really like today's presentation. It's long and it's hard, but it gave me a lot of insight.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for pointing that out, because it is a huge group of people when you combine the tennis and pickleball. And, we have lots of that's what makes Brentwood awesome, is we have so many special interests of bikers or, football players that have come up through Blaze and are now playing on championship teams that went through Ravenwood and all that stuff. And we have this whole aspect of the community that for all ages and male and female and all ages, that it's a feeder into a sport that's a lifelong thing. And we have, everything in our community is amenity in terms of the extras, the library, we have our needs and our wants, and we are blessed that we have a lot of wants that we get to fulfill the wants for those members of the community. That's why they move here. We have great parks, we have great trail system and all that, and this is one more that is a significant population that would use it and that could benefit it from it. I mean, we have Andy Veal was just USTA of Tennessee named, Professional of the Year for USTA in all of Tennessee. So the elevation in the community and the expectation of just a top-notch facility is there. Brentwood does everything really well. I mean, we hear all the time, being on the library board, how many people love our library and so forth. And our police headquarters, all of it, we do it all really well. So I appreciate that we're examining all of this and looking at the best way to provide this, and whether you call it an amenity or a financial investment. I think it's a hybrid on this one, and that's what's so unique. It is an amenity, but it's an amenity that pays for itself, as opposed to our other amenities like mountain bike trails or whatever that don't pay for themselves. We still provide them for people because that's all a part of the whole package of in this community of a healthy lifestyle and all the different things we have. That's why we give back to our schools too. That's a plus for this community. So it all builds to the greater environment of everybody.
I think that the city commission and the county commission agreed that there was a need for tennis, that it was going away unless somebody stepped up and did something. They brought us the plan, and in June, we were all ready to vote on approving a city-county joint project until it was suggested that we put it on hold indefinitely, and the handwriting was on the wall from that night on. This recommendation was a foregone conclusion. It just was. And I don't care what you say, I will believe that until the cows come home. It was a foregone conclusion. I knew what the recommendation would be. As I said, the tail has been wagging the dog. I never heard our parks director say one word about this project. Our park board never had it on their agenda. Why?
Committee didn't even bring it to a vote of all the
Yeah.
members to approve the report.
No. And the
They all-
committee overstepped what their mission was. Their mission was to bring us information, not make a recommendation. But they came out of it with a recommendation that we go forward with this. And now you're saying today, or you, whichever one, I think you, that we need to move forward because there's some buckets of money that can be shifted around. I feel like I'm gonna have to live with whatever this foregone conclusion is, but I'm not gonna be quiet about it.
Well, Kirk asked for us. I
Did you ask
said
for
we
a
need to
vote
move forward.
today?
No.
No.
Oh,
I'm asking what additional input process do
we
you
need-
need to make a final
Yeah.
decision?
Yeah,
I think we need at least one or two community meetings,
I do too,
maybe a
at
month
least.
apart, of people, because I don't get just pie in the sky, rose-colored glasses on this from the emails and the many people I talk to on a daily basis. So I think there's a lot in the community that don't think this is a wise use of their tax dollars. So
Well, say-
I don't necessarily think it needs to be, or do you want this here, or do you want that there? I think maybe it just needs to be a community meeting where people can give their input.
So Commissioner Travis, and since we're in the open meeting, I feel that this is our time to discuss it and share our insights. It's my understanding that when you say there's no partnership on the table, which I guess is factually correct as we sit
there is
here.
no part, there is no.
Because the partnership that was on the table a year ago and up until,
June.
last fall, well, really, June. But a lot of it had to do, this ad hoc committee didn't do this report until November. The county had to do their bond issue and their budget in October, which we knew. But I haven't
And they
had
withdrew in
anybody,
September, I believe.
the committee's
November.
report was in November.
It was August.
They withdrew their offer way before then.
Well, they
They
did
didn't
because.
tell them we didn't want it,
because
they walked away.
Because they had the timeline and they knew we weren't gonna miss their deadline. But from the information I have from Brentwood residents on the county commission and other folks at the county, is they haven't said they would never, ever consider it again. They said that they couldn't do it this past year because they didn't feel like it was in the best interest of the county, I believe was almost verbatim what was communicated. And at the time, that is probably the case in part because, we deferred it and it wasn't gonna meet their deadline, and they could tell that it wasn't gonna meet their deadline as they met with the ad hoc committee. So I didn't know if you had people at the county tell you that they would never, ever consider this again?
I've had one person tell me that they didn't think it was likely, a commissioner.
He's
I've
sitting
talked
over
to
there.
5 people, the county that
If they want to come forward, tell them to come forward. I don't think.
Well, I'm just saying that I don't have any reason to think that a partnership, a beneficial partnership for the larger community couldn't be rebuilt if this is a desirable amenity. Now, like Commissioner Little said, we may need to do some public conversation about whether or not this is a desirable amenity in the larger picture of the capital improvements on the table for our community. And I think that's a good idea, whether it's a referendum or public meetings or whatnot. But if we can agree that, at some level that it is an amenity that we want to invest in for the reasons you mentioned about that community, I don't know that there isn't an opportunity to rebuild a partnership. It may take some time since we kind of walked by the opportunity when it was timely and on the table by approving a framework for the discussion last summer, which would have been a good signal of good intention. Instead, we did the opposite, and the county, of course, can read the intent of different political maneuvers. But I was just curious, because I've not heard anything that says that this could never happen again.
If we had no other means, if we said the only way we could build this is to partner with the county, that's one situation. If you say this is a good project, it is an amenity and a financial investment that the community wants. But if the only way to do that was to build with the county, then I'd say it would be worth looking at the county. If we can afford to do it ourselves, you put a little bit of money in the bank, you pay for future maintenance, your citizens get priority, and it's a well-run facility, and you're servicing what I referenced on page 6, I think that's a good deal. If the county wants to come to us and say, we're interested, I wouldn't say we'd tell them no, but they can come if they want to and say they're interested. They haven't come. The last we heard was we withdraw.
Well, I feel like they came and did that, and we said we weren't. So the ball's probably in our court from that standpoint.
So I think members of the ad hoc committee went back and asked to see if they were willing to come back to the table, and they weren't at that time. I mean, they kept doors of lines of communication open to make it happen. But I think in result that it's obviously worthwhile doing it, like you said, because the county looked at it and said, this is worth doing. We looked at it and said, this is worth doing. The only thing that's changed is whether we do it on our own or we do it with somebody.
Right.
It's still worth doing. The demand is there, the need is there, the request of the citizens are there. We've had some emails of recent that said, don't do it, but for a year or more, we've had a deluge of emails and support, and people, this room was full of people from the community in support of it. So the fact that the community still wants it, that hasn't changed. It's how it's funded.
I don't get the sense the community necessarily wants it. I get the sense that the people who have a vested interest in it want it.
Well, sure, any bike, a bike person comes and says they want a bike path. Everybody has special interests. So.
With $13 million special interest.
There's a lot of
That's just
different
starting out
opinions for
money.
sure.
That doesn't include
We're
that
all
whole thing.
entitled to our different opinions, and, we listen to the residents, and we all hear from different residents, and it's our job to represent those interests as best we know. you know, the thing that's kind of interesting as we look through, there's kind of wants and needs, but there's a lot of first world problems that we're dealing with on our CIP plan, for sure. So we're very fortunate and blessed. But there's a lot of different input for sure out there, and we're all entitled to our different opinions. So.
I'm just asking, how do you all get to a decision? What do you need from us? What do you
We
want?
probably need a little bit of time to digest the numbers and have a discussion after one of the briefings, whether it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever the case may be. But I think that's
But just
gonna take a little time
keep in
to
mind that
digest the numbers.
if we've got 8 weeks to produce a 5-year CIP for you, so that these are all big factors into.
Prior to that. so
I mean,
that makes sense. It's a great request.
well, and the reality is, I mean, as I said, it's not all in 1 year.
Right.
You've got money in the budget for next year that moves all of these projects along. You just kind of leaving unanswered the year 2 and year 3 part.
And I think it's more important to get it right than to rush. And if it takes 4 weeks to figure out how to get it right, great. If it takes 4 months how to figure out to get it right, that's a whole nother thing. But to have I'll call it an artificial deadline because we're the ones that are in control of that. I don't think we rush based on any type of a deadline.
Understand, I've still got to produce a budget for you, so.
Absolutely you do, but we're in control of that budget and,
Yeah.
try and push or move quickly based on that.
I mean, I think you still could produce a budget, making the assumption, estimating that we need to figure out a way to financially do it on our own. And then if we choose not to, that money becomes available again. But if you factor in that we need to figure out a way to move the projects around a little bit and move the numbers out of the buckets that we've talked about to see if it can work and what that looks like.
Which is basically how you do the CIP anyway.
Right.
So worst case scenario, which is usually what you plan for. So you could plan for worst case scenario and trying to find that extra 5 million. That's all we're talking about is an extra 5 million because the other
No, there's
millions.
12 million.
But it's already accounted for in the CIP. We've talked about this. I mean, the difference,
Not all accounted, but yeah, but I'm just saying.
So finding that extra 5 million for specifically a Racquet facility over the next however long it needs to work, how it works with all contracts and all that sort of thing, then to proceed that way. And if you hear from us that we say no or something else comes up, then we make that decision then. But then it's worst case scenario fleshed out in the budget.
But again, I've got to find 12 million, not just 5 million. A lot of which is, I understand, but I've got to show an extra $12 million in the CIP than what it shows today, not 5 million, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Okay, that's why we pay you the big bucks.
That's good.
Yeah, and the mayor said we got time, but public input, you can do community meetings. I mean, those are traditionally,
I think
traditionally the way we've done things, usually that's just who can mobilize the most people to show up. I mean, I'll be honest with you, as you all know, so.
I think we'll hear from people at our city commission meetings during the public speaking. I don't think we need to hold special meetings. I think-
But again, we don't have to decide that today.
12 million bucks, a referendum might be in order.
Oh, I absolutely think so.
It's funny, that referendum didn't hold. We wound up blowing the back out of General MacArthur. That referendum about extending General MacArthur didn't hold. There was the vote, and it was to proceed forward with
No,
extending.
it was Mallory Lane that was to be extended, not General MacArthur.
They would never have gone north of
No, it would not.
Weichel Road.
Yeah.
But there was a rezoning vote. Yes, you're right. But the road itself would have never gone
You're
north.
one of the most fiscally conservative people on this board. I would think you would really favor a referendum. Because I've never known you, you're tight-fisted when it comes to money, and that's a compliment, so
I don't necessarily take it that way, but thank you.
you are. I mean, you've always been on, and I
I
think that's a
appreciate your
good
opinion,
thing.
thank you.
So,
One other question here, back to this, if it's an amenity, staff would present it as an amenity, not a financial investment. From the cost benefit side, is there any data you would like us to get from the county relative to Maryland Farms or anything as far as the
yeah,
utilization?
that would be interesting to
Could you
see.
explain what you just said about you would say it was an amenity, not a,
Financial investment,
could
right?
you just explain that a little bit?
Well, just the cost of the capital for this doesn't make financial sense if you're looking at it from a return on investment, which is fine. I'm just saying that then it flips to being an amenity, just like most of whatever else we do. And then it becomes a question of, do you want to spend $5 million to buy Windy Hill Park for that area of town? That's the cost benefit part of it. I can't make a case to you that the financial aspect of it pays for itself when you take into account the cost of money and the opportunity cost of the capital. Operationally, no question.
Okay, operationally.
Yeah.
You're just, the only thing you're considering is opportunity cost of capital, which is
Yeah,
the
the cost
decision
of
we make
capital.
on every single thing we vote on.
Right.
Every day when we.
But I'm saying you make that decision in my recommendation as an amenity, as just the right amenity for the community, not as a financial.
And one more question. On our budget, annual budget going forward, if we proceed with the, this Racquet facility, as we've discussed, it is a enterprise fund. On the budget annually, will there be a cost line where we are putting money into this Racquet facility? Will there be money from taxes ongoing annually that go, like we do, what, $3 million for the library every year? Parks Department is.
No, it would be a
investing $6 million.
self-supporting.
Okay, so it would not be on the.
Operationally, it's self-supporting, yes.
So,
Yeah.
okay, just making sure that those who are listening and learning understand that.
Right.
It will pay for its maintenance, operation, staffing, replacement, plumbing issues. It'll pay for all that. And it's self.
Again, based upon the model, the county felt like their model, the models aren't that different, it's just double the numbers.
So two
Yeah, operationally.
authoritative, okay. It will
But again,
take care
my
of
issue
itself.
of not being a financial investment is the capital.
Opportunity cost, opportunity cost is what we vote on every single time we vote.
But also the money you literally spend on it to build it, the 13 million bucks.
Right, we'll come back. It'll be effectively paid back with that money that's earned from the people that pay to play tennis over time.
Well, 30-plus years, we would never, again, that's a
nothing else.
return we would never make a financial decision on.
But nothing else in our city does that. There is no other asset in our city that even has the potential of doing that.
Right, because of what we do as a city.
Right.
But from a financial aspect of it, you would never invest $13 million to get a return that pays for itself over 30-plus years.
Right.
Is all I'm saying. And I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying it affects how you decide whether it's a good choice to make. I just don't think you can justify it financially, you just decide to justify it as an amenity.
Right.
That does pay for itself operationally.
Because all of our other amenities don't pay for themselves.
Because that's what we do, right, no question.
We do, we
No question.
provide a service.
Yeah.
We use taxpayer dollars to provide services.
Anything else? When you get home before it ices or whatever.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. My sister just sent a text from Memphis.